found himself stepping off the truck and into the bustling atmosphere of the training camp alongside a group of fellow recruits. The environment was intense from the very first moment, charged with the resounding shouts and authoritative commands of the drill instructors who wasted no time establishing absolute control. All the new recruits were ordered to move swiftly, find their proper places without delay, and sit down on the benches provided. Amidst the strict tension, one of the instructors began recounting a nostalgic anecdote about how Floyd the barber back in his hometown used to cut hair. He described how the barber would leave the hair a bit longer in the back, trim the sideburns level with the ear holes, take a little off the top, rub in some pomade, part it neatly on the side, and form a small rabbit ridge right up in the front before combing it wet. Although this method did not completely match the traditional style of Floyd the barber, the instructor reminded them that, after all, this was merely their very first day in boot camp. The program featured Jim Nabors starring as Gomer-Pyle, alongside Frank Sutton starring as Sergeant Carter. Sergeant Carter stepped forward with a stern and commanding presence, declaring himself as their senior drill instructor who would oversee every single minute of every single day during their rigorous training. He made it clear that he would dictate precisely when they ate and when they dressed. Hearing this, a remarkably innocent recruit naively remarked that the sergeant was going to spoil them by doing all those things for them. Instantly, a sharp reprimand echoed through the room to silence anyone speaking out of turn. The recruits were reminded that they were standing at attention, meaning they were forbidden from moving or talking. When they were required to speak, the absolute first word across their lips had to be "sir." Sergeant Carter demanded to know if that fundamental rule was completely clear to everyone. In unison, the recruits responded with a resounding "yes, sir." Finding the volume insufficient, the sergeant demanded a louder repetition, and the response echoed back once more. Suddenly, the sergeant noticed something peculiar and zeroed in on a specific private, demanding to know what could possibly be so amusing. Gomer-Pyle timidly explained that when everyone shouted as loudly as requested, the recruit standing directly behind him had hollered right into his ear, which tickled immensely and caused him to grin, presuming the same thing happened to the person in front of him as well. Absolute fury crossed Sergeant Carter's face as he ordered the private to wipe that smile off his face immediately. Pyle innocently defended himself by pointing out that the sergeant had just hollered in his ear again and made him grin, with a sharp command to knock it off. Sergeant Carter turned his attention to address the entire platoon, reminding them proudly that he had commanded 3 honor platoons in a row and was fully determined to secure a 4th with their collective help. The physical drill sessions commenced with rhythmic marching and precise movements. The squad practiced stepping, dressing right, and executing various in-place maneuvers while listening closely to the cadence counted by the instructor. Amidst the strict military precision, Gomer-Pyle suddenly spoke up to compliment the sergeant on how exceptionally good his voice sounded while counting the cadence. Taken aback, Sergeant Carter asked for clarification. Assuming the recruit was offering a genuine compliment, Pyle enthusiastically suggested that the sergeant really ought to sing in his church choir if he was not already doing so. Realizing the absurd humor of the situation, Sergeant Carter decided to reward Pyle with an extra opportunity to hear that voice while forcing him to drop to the deck and perform 50 push-ups. As Pyle cheerfully worked through the exercise, he continued to praise the rhythm of the counting. Much to the exasperation of the instructor, the training schedule then transitioned to the grueling obstacle course, designed to simulate combat conditions where recruits had to move with maximum speed and urgency. The groups formed up and advanced under the watchful eye of Sergeant Carter. When Pyle reached the tall wall obstacle, he became completely bewildered, stopping in his tracks and treating the barrier as if it were a casual game or a fun playground activity. Sergeant Carter rushed over, completely astounded, and asked Pyle if he thought he was having fun. Pyle innocently replied that the wall was significantly higher than he had originally anticipated. When the sergeant sarcastically asked if he needed a small stepladder brought out for him, Pyle politely declined the offer with sincere gratitude, stating that he would simply keep trying on his own. Sergeant Carter shouted that Pyle was under simulated enemy fire and needed to roll over that wall and keep moving without hesitation. Understanding the gravity of the training, Pyle asked the sergeant for a helpful boost to get over the top, expressing his appreciation once the hurdle was cleared. The chaotic rush continued as Pyle dove into the dark, tunnel-like obstacle that felt as dark as the inside of a cow, stumbling blindly through the cramped space. When it came time for the landing practice, Pyle clumsily landed headfirst instead of feet first, leading a bewildered Sergeant Carter to question whether the recruit even knew the difference between his own head and his feet. Pyle thoughtfully admitted that it certainly was a tricky puzzle. The sergeant groaned that an 80-year-old grandmother could navigate the course better, prompting Pyle to sweetly bless the dear woman's heart. During the rope-swinging challenge, Pyle failed to generate enough momentum and plunged directly into the water below. Once he was pulled out, he innocently observed that the water was not particularly cold, leaving the sergeant utterly speechless. Later, during a rare moment of downtime, Pyle sat down to write a letter home to his family. He puzzled over the spelling of the word friendly, asking a barracks mate whether it was spelled with an I or an EI. He then cheerfully shared his thoughts, expressing his genuine belief that Sergeant Carter was actually a fine fellow. His companion reacted with sheer disbelief, utterly failing to comprehend how anyone could possibly like an instructor who did nothing but yell all day long. Pyle logically explained that the sergeant simply had to shout to maintain everyone's attention, because if he spoke in a soft voice, the recruits' minds would wander, and they would likely just stand there staring intently at his nose. Suddenly, a loud command interrupted the conversation, ordering Private Gomer-Pyle to report to Sergeant Carter in the duty hut immediately. Pyle hurried off, whispering to his friend that he would not mention their conversation about the sergeant. Earlier that day, another recruit named Private Swanson had entered the duty hut to receive a disciplinary reprimand for speaking while in detention, stumbling through the proper procedures while wearing gloves. When it was Pyle's turn, he completely forgot the formal protocol for entering a duty hut that he had been taught on his very first day. Sergeant Carter immediately ordered him out to try again properly. After several comically clumsy attempts at knocking and requesting permission to enter, Pyle finally gained admittance. Inside the duty hut, Sergeant Carter confronted Pyle, demanding to know if he was personally determined to prevent the platoon from earning the honor title. Pyle earnestly insisted that he liked the sergeant very much, comparing him favorably to people he had known back home, and noting that while he did not love him, since the sergeant was not someone named Ken, he certainly liked him just fine. The sheer innocence and obliviousness of Pyle's remarks left the sergeant torn between frustration and amusement, ultimately ordering him out of the room to shape up. Pyle turned to leave, but momentarily popped his head back inside just to double-check whether the sergeant truly liked him back, pushing the bewildered instructor to his absolute limit. As night fell and the rest of the platoon slept, Gomer-Pyle snuck back out to the obstacle course, driven by a deep desire to master it and exhaustively pushing his limits. The next morning during roll call, the corporals discovered that Pyle was completely unresponsive and unable to report for duty. The matter was reported to the medical staff, who examined him and diagnosed him with acute asthenia, a condition of complete exhaustion and fatigue. When his fellow recruits visited him to express their surprise at seeing him sleep the entire day, Pyle groggily woke up and asked if it was time for breakfast, completely unaware that an entire day had passed. Upon learning from his friends that the sergeant was furious because Pyle's struggles on the obstacle course were seen as the sole obstacle standing in the way of the honor platoon, Pyle felt a strong sense of personal responsibility. When night descended once more, Gomer-Pyle quietly returned to the obstacle course to practice under the cover of darkness. While he was diligently running through the challenges, a passing senior officer on night patrol spotted him and questioned why he was wandering the training grounds at such a late hour. Pyle openly and innocently explained everything, sharing his admiration for Sergeant Carter, the importance of the honor platoon, and his determination to practice, so he would no longer hold anyone back. The officer listened with a mixture of surprise and profound understanding, gently advising the dedicated private to return to his quarters and get some proper rest. The following morning, the medical reports regarding Pyle's recurring acute asthenia reached Sergeant Carter once again, driving the frustrated instructor straight to the battalion commander's office with a formal request to have the troublesome recruit removed from the camp entirely. However, when the sergeant entered the office and began laying out his grievances, the colonel smiled warmly and interrupted him. The commanding officer showered praise on Sergeant Carter, commending his incredible leadership and inspirational ability that motivated a recruit to voluntarily sacrifice his sleep to run the obstacle course by night.